Hey folks, this is Riker, and a new patch for Diablo 4 just went live. In this video, we're going to go through the patch notes together, analyze them, and find out, is this the big patch we've all been waiting for? Does this deliver the promised changes to Nightmare Dungeons? Do we have any balance changes in here? Does the meta change up at all? Let's dive in. And in case you want to jump around to different sections of the video, there'll be timestamps below. Also, if you want to follow along with the blog post yourself, I'll link to that in the description. Now, I recently made a video about 4 must-have community resources, tools that I use while playing the game that enhances my experience. And before diving into today's guide, I just wanted to highlight one extra tool, Mobalytics, who are also sponsoring this video. And the Mobalytics app gives you an in-game overlay. You just do Tab Q, and it's a tool that gives you up-to-date resources on tier lists, build guides, so you can sort by, whatever class. Let's say I'm a rogue. What are the rogue builds that they have in here? Let's say I just want to see what are the S tier rogue builds. All right, Twisting Blades. Cool. I'm already running a Twisting Blades build. Let's compare and contrast. And you got this all right there in game for you. You don't have to bring up a second monitor. Some people don't have second monitors. They're pulling up their phones. Gives you as well the aspects that you want to pull up on your gear, so you can compare that. Gives you your stat priorities and everything all in the overlay. And that's what I like most about Mobalytics, is that it's all in game with you there, real easy. Alt Q disappears, Alt Q comes back, and Mobalytics is also doing a giveaway. If you download the application by following the link in the description below, you'll be automatically entered into a drawing to win either a statue of Anarius, a statue of Lilith, or one of 10 Diablo 4 Collector's Editions that they're giving away. The Mobalytics app is free, so just click the link, download it, try it out, and have a chance to win a nice prize. Alright, so this is build 103, posted June 27th. Seems they have a number of bug fixes to dungeons, events, and other activities. Some of them were impossible to complete, something wouldn't spawn or something, so hopefully that's all resolved now. A number of other gameplay fixes, local co-op fixes, quest fixes, and some UI fixes. Notably here, fix an issue where a party member's health bar would appear to be 0 if they left the vicinity of their player while not at full health. I was always wondering, hey, how come my buddy is dead, but he's not dead? So that's a nice fix. Oh, fixed multiple instances where pins on the map from either a quest or the player would not function properly. Looking forward to seeing if they... Oh man, so part of the reason that I still don't trust the pin system and always bring up the map, because in my review I'm like, I bring up the map a lot, and people are like, Riker, actually you can just lay down a pin. Actually, I know, I don't trust the pins, because they make me take a scenic route around Sanctuary to view the marvelous sights instead of taking me on the direct path. Maybe about 10% of the time it makes me do that. So hopefully now, hopefully they upgraded their GPS systems and we can get the most direct paths with these pins. Fixed an issue where the Purveyor of Curiosities menu, that's the Obel Gambler, would erroneously display item quality on some items. This didn't affect what item quality was available to gamble for. We kept testing this and we're like, what's the difference? There seemed to be no difference on your gamble outcome, whether there was a sacred, ancestral, or non-sacred item to gamble on. It led to a lot of theories, a lot of superstitions. Glad to know this was just a bug, and so now we don't have to worry about this anymore. If I had to guess, it's some relic of some old system within the game. Alright, a number of other fixes. On to gameplay adjustments. This is what we're all here for. Experience rewards. Significantly increase the experience awarded for completing Nightmare Dungeons. Yes. Significantly increase the experience gained from killing monsters in Nightmare Dungeons. Okay, so not just killing the monsters, but also for completing. Now we have incentive to go all the way to the end, not just do the dungeon halfway through. Helltide chests now provide substantially more bonus experience when opened. Oh wow. Helltide was already super rewarding. Now you're getting XP or more XP for opening the chests. Significantly increased rewarded experience for completing individual whispers across the board. I did not expect a buff to Whispers. Okay, I wonder... So basically at high levels of play, Whispers are effectively useless to do. The way I treat them, I don't mind Whispers. The way I treat them is, I don't go out of my way to do them, just playing the game normally, Helltide and Nightmare Dungeons, and World Bosses, I happen to be completing Whispers along the way, so it's just a nice little turn-in every now and then. I wonder if this bonus experience is going to be enough to make me chase them? Probably not, but I think this is going to really help the 1 to 50 experience. What's the fastest way to level 1 to 50? You find whatever is the highest density dungeon, run it halfway through over and over and over until Blizzard nerfs it, then you do the next one and the next one and the next one. There's YouTube videos on this. Again, these videos last a few days before that dungeon is nerfed, so this is not something that I advise people to do. I've always advised do efficient whispers. So now they're buffing the XP of whispers, so hopefully that's going to be even more efficient to do, and not just like what's good for your sanity and good for gearing at the same time. And they fixed a bug with an event that wasn't awarding XP. So I believe the intent of the devs is that the fastest and most efficient way to level your character 1 to 50 is doing whispers. That has always been my impression of what the game design was. So hopefully now that is going to be the case. Alright, General. The Helltide roaming bosses will now more consistently drop higher quality loot. Great change. That super tough boss dropped nothing. He took forever to kill, and he would drop nothing. It was not worth the time that it took to kill him. Hopefully, that has changed now. Players can now teleport to their Nightmare Dungeon directly through the map. I did not expect this to be so soon. Wow. Okay, we're gonna take this for a test drive. We'll finish going through the patch notes, and then we'll show this live. Weekly bonus caches from world bosses no longer have a level requirement for opening. This bug persisted for so long, I stopped bothering with the world bosses. We're currently working on increasing the monster and elite density of end game content and plan to introduce this change early season 1. Okay, so they are gonna do density increases, just don't expect it before the start of the season. I didn't expect them to do that, so that's very interesting. Okay. But yeah, one thing I wonder as well, and we'll test this at the end of this patch note overview, is what about all those level 80 caches that we farmed? Can we now just open them? Or is it only going to apply to future caches? Very easy test, we'll find out soon. Alright, on to balance changes. We're continuing our efforts to make all class builds feel fun and powerful with another round of balance updates. In particular, we have seen community feedback stating that basic skills aren't impactful enough in combat. These changes will not change the fundamental relationship between basic skills and core skills. Basic skill is meant to either be your generator or what you use when you don't have enough resource for your core skill. Your core skill is your main damage dealer. But we hope that they help smooth out the leveling experience while we explore additional ways to strengthen them. We are also increasing the power of some skills that players feel are lagging behind their peers. As we look forward to future updates, we're monitoring other heavily discussed topics such as minion survivability and build parity. Please keep sending us your feedback and we'll see you in Sanctuary. Okay. Let's see what the balance changes are. Barbarian. Lunging Strike buff! Huh. To both damage and fury generated. Lunging Strike was already the best generator because of the lunge. When you're a melee character, being able to gap close in order to stick onto enemies as easily as possible made Lunging Strike pretty much the best, if not the mandatory basic skill to take. Now they're giving it a buff. Interesting. Oh, but they're buffing the others as well. Bash, fury generated increase, not enough. Bash is okay. The Fortify is going from 10% to 20%. Maybe there's something there if you're on some kind of Fortify heavy build, but probably not enough. Frenzy base damage increased from 20% to 22%. Not enough to change anything. Flay. Bleeding base damage increased from 36% to 40%. Fury generated increased from 9 to 10. Enhanced Flay's vulnerable chance increased from 10 to 15%. Probably still not enough to change anything there. It does seem like the meta will remain Lunging Strike. Double Swing, base damage increase. I don't think that's enough to make it competitive with the other generator options. Whirlwind, Hoda, and Rend probably will remain the top bar builds there. Kick, cooldown reduced from 17 to 13 seconds. It's a really fun and cool ability that just isn't used. Base damage dealt to enemies knocked back into terrain increased from 54 to 70%. Honestly, you can put that to like 100%. It's such like a skill shot, right? So with Kick, you kick an enemy back, and if you happen to kick him into terrain, you deal a nice bonus damage. But again, that's a skill shot, and not rewarded enough for that skill shot, especially given there are a lot of factors in which the player can't control, but hopefully we'll see if something emerges there. Charge. Enhanced charges base damage dealt to enemies knocked back into terrain increased from 15% to 30%. Okay, charge is a good mobility skill. Doesn't get used enough. Maybe something here. Leap, Mighty Leap, slow increased from 50% to 70%. I don't see this changing much. Iron Skin. Barrier increased from 10% to 20% of max life. Okay, that's a nice, sizable buff there. Right now, the Barb meta is 100% revolving around shouts. Just, like, load your skill bar with 3 shouts, no matter what build you're doing. Shouts are just so crazy strong. If we can get some other support skills to come in instead, that'd be nice. Call of the Ancients. Prime, Call of the Ancients, bonus attack speed increase from 10 to 20%. Okay, Wrath of the Berserker is what we see at endgame as the most commonly used Barb ult. So some buff to Call of the Ancients actually really improves the Barb's early game, where Call of the Ancients tends to be the preferred ult. Maybe this will help. Well, first off, you know, Barbs are a little on the weaker end, 1 to 50, so this doesn't actually help there a bit. It still has a long cooldown. Maybe it's going to help make it a bit more competitive at endgame. Then Iron Maelstrom is just, it's not used at all. Cooldown reduced from 60 to 45, very good change. Prime Iron Maelstrom, okay. Bonus crit strike chance, 10 to 30%, that's big. Bonus crit strike damage, 20 to 40%. Okay, these are some... Again, Iron Maelstrom was very underutilized. These are significant buffs. Is it enough to bring it into the meta? Probably the most exciting changes we're seeing here. Most exciting and significant changes we're seeing here. Then Bounding Slam, base damage increase from 75 to 112%. What is Bounding Slam? Barbarian Bounding Slam. Oh, it's the dismount ability. Who cares? Okay. Alright, interesting. So the dismount ability got a buff. Legendary aspects. The below includes changes to flat damage legendary aspects. These effects scale with item power. For example, at 820 item power, top, Bulkathos Earthquake increases from 1700 to 2600 damage. Okay. Bulkathos flat damage increased by... Okay, so we're seeing there the minimum is increasing by... about 50%. Max isn't increasing by as much. There's actually a number of these legendary affects being buffed here. Okay. So basically this aspect made it that when you leap, you cause an earthquake where you land. Similar to the leap quake build in Diablo 3. By itself, probably not enough to change the meta, but then we get Earthquake as well. So another synergizing item with that. Earthquake flat damage increased by the same amount. That makes Ground Stomp cause an Earthquake. So they're trying to make the Leapquake Barb a thing. Basically a build that revolves around creating a lot of Earthquakes. Step in the right direction. Then probably a bunch of stuff for Whirlwind. So Dust Devils, flat damage increased by about 50%. It's a nice buff. Currently Whirlwind builds don't really use Dust Devils. They're too unreliable. And monster density just isn't high enough to really make use of them. But I can see that they're doing a bunch of buffs to Dust Devils, so maybe. Okay, let's see Windlasher here. Same amount of damage increase. So Windlasher is that when you cast Double Swing, you create a Dust Devil. So they're trying to get Double Swing and... Wait. Alright, this is not a buff to Whirlwind, because you wouldn't have both Whirlwind and Double Swing. They're trying to make a Double Swing Dust Devil build. Interesting. Then we got about a 20% damage buff to Devilish. This is a general buff to any build that can use Dust Devils, so whenever you spend X amount of Fury, a Dust Devil is generated. Again, it's not enough. Now, Iron Warrior is an aspect that makes Iron Skin gain damage reduction and make you unstoppable. So we're getting about a 20% buff here to the high end. Nice change. I don't know that it's enough. Maybe coupled with the changes to Iron Skin. Maybe this will make Iron Skin worthy of swapping out a shout. Alright, the Overkill aspect is for the Death Blow skill. It makes Death Blow create a shockwave instead of a single target. This is about a 30% buff to its damage. Probably not enough to make Death Blow meta. Death Blow's a really fun skill though. Hellhammer adds a damage over time effect to Upheaval. This is about a 75% buff. So definitely a much more significant buff, but I don't know if it's enough, if we see enough synergy to really get Upheaval into being a meta build. But definitely one of the more significant buffs here. Alright, onto the Druid. For Earth Spike, tiny damage increase, a little bit more Spirit Gen. Fortify increase getting doubled. Interesting, with Druids, you can really build up a lot of Fortify. Wind Shear, slight damage increase, slight Spirit Gen increase. In fact, we're seeing Spirit Gen increased to all the skills, just by a small amount, but honestly, that's going to really help at the low levels. Druid 1 to 50 feels the worst for any class. One of the reasons being Spirit Generation, so this is going to overall help that experience for sure. Eventually, Druids get to a point where they can sustain Spirit Gen. Once they've built up enough in their toolkit, everything really comes online, and Druids feel really good in the end game, so this is going to at least help quite a bit in the early game. Then Lightning Storm is having its enhanced Lightning Storm duration increased by 50%. There's no Lightning Storm build, so they're trying to make something happen here. Probably not enough, unless we see some supporting items also buffed. We're seeing some buffs to Shred. The damage is buffed a bit, but the healing, that's significant. That's double the healing now. Raging Shred has an almost 50% damage buff, and some crit strike damage buff as well. We do have Shred builds right now. This will help bring them a little higher up. They're not the top builds. Some could be good for speed farming, but this is going to help bring them up, elevate them more. Again, biggest change there is the doubling of the healing for great sustain. Big buff to wolves here. So pets perform really well in the early game for Druid, but there's no end game pet build that's really competitive. This is a huge buff to being able to pop those wolves that much more often. That's actually going to be... If you're playing a Druid 1 to 50, grab some wolves, man. That is a big damage spike, and now you can do it every 11 seconds. Then lucky hit chance increased quite a bit. I'm interested to see what could be made of this. Again, I'm not expecting any pet builds now to be endgame viable, but this could actually really help and elevate the, again, combined with the changes to the Spirit Gen, this could really elevate the early game Druid. Now, Hurricane getting about a 40% damage buff, that's a very nice change. Hurricane is a skill that is used. It doesn't feel particularly strong, but this will help make the Storm Druid that much stronger. I'm actually surprised by this change, because Hurricane is actually a very popular skill for Druids. Then Rabies is getting about a 50% damage buff. Rabies basically doesn't exist in the meta right now. This is a sizable buff. Maybe Poison Druids could become a thing. The Cataclysm alt is getting about a 30% buff. Probably not enough to bring it into the Storm Druid meta, given its 60-second cooldown. Lacerate's getting like a 15% damage buff. Really not significant there. That said, Werewolf builds do use Lacerate already, so they don't really need too much of a buff. This helps bring up Werewolf builds. Petrify gets a buff to its crit strike bonus. Petrify is sometimes used. This makes it a bit better. Maybe it'll be a bit more common now. Pummel, I don't know what that is. I'm gonna assume it's a dismount power. I'm gonna assume, based on these two data points, that they are just buffing the dismount powers across the board. For some classes, the dismount powers are really weak. In general, they're not terribly strong. I think the Sorc probably has the best dismount power, and the Rogue probably has the weakest. Given how rare dismount powers occur, yeah, buff them, crank them up, why not? They're fun, they're visually fun, they're exciting, but half the time I don't even bother. I just dismount and then attack, as opposed to using my dismount power. Okay, the Bestial Rampage key passive is getting a buff. Bestial Rampage is the full Transformo Druid, Lycanthrope, Werebear, Were-Druid. If you're swapping between the two, you gain the most benefit from this. So about a 20% buff to the attack speed and a 50% buff to the damage bonus. We definitely do see builds that incorporate at least one wolf and one bear skill, but we really just don't see this key passive selected often. This might make it more inviting. The Nature's Fury key passive also got a buff. This is something that we do see used in some builds. Chance to cast a free spell increased by a 50% buff here. So this is for the split Storm and Earth Magic Druid. We're seeing a buff to Lupine Ferocity key passive. Already this is something that's used in any build really that uses Werewolf. It's very common to take this key passive. It's only about a 10% damage buff, however. We're getting a 40% buff to the damage of the Runeworker's Conduit aspect. This is for Storm Druids, any kind of Druid that uses lightning damage, basically. It makes the air around you charge with lightning and periodically zap enemies, so now that damage is being increased by a sizable amount. This item isn't typically used in the meta Storm build, so maybe this will help. The Mangled aspect is getting about a 40% buff to its chance to trigger. This is when you're a Werebear and you're hit, you have a chance to generate one spirit. There's generally better options out there. Might this become competitive with Umbral? As a Druid, you can tank a lot of damage, you can tank a lot of hits, but that one spirit gain at a time, I don't see this making a big difference. Now, Seismic Shift aspect is something that takes your Earth Spike power, gives it a cooldown, and makes it attack in a line instead of just one. That cooldown really hurts, so now we're reducing that cooldown by 50%. Probably still not enough to get this to be a competitive aspect. We got about a 10% buff to the Blurred Beast aspect. This was already being used on Shred speed builds. This helps make them even more competitive. Alright, on to the Necromancer. Reap. Base skill damage increased by a little bit. Acolyte Reap's cooldown between corpses reduced from 5 to 4 seconds. So, look, at the end of the day, across the board, all 4 basic skills are getting buffed. Slight damage increases, sometimes a slight buff to their essence generated. Their cooldowns are improved a bit. Nothing massively game-changing here, but just overall, it's gonna be better being a Necro. A little bit. We're getting the tiniest buff to Sever's base damage, but the return base damage is increased. I really like this change. So Sever's a skill where you throw a scythe at enemies, and it comes back to you like a super deadly boomerang, and it's that return damage that they're buffing, so this makes it more of a skill shot, and they're almost doubling the damage of that return shot. Sever's a really fun leveling build, but it doesn't really perform well in the end game. Who knows with this? Blood Lance is a skill that just underperforms relative to some other of the spenders, like Bone Spear, for instance. It's just a bloody weaker Bone Spear. Now they're making it more likely to overpower. Overpower damage in general isn't something that performs well in the end game. It just doesn't scale properly. It performs well early to mid game, but the way overpower damage is just, it's not a multiplier, it's just tacked on to the end of your damage, which is why it doesn't fit into any of the damage buckets or damage decks. Once you start getting into really high numbers of monster health and damage, just overpower falls off. I don't see this changing the meta in any way. Bone Prison cooldown reduced from 20 to 18 seconds. Oh great, more Necromancers can get me trapped while I'm trying to fight a Shava. Dreadful Bone Prism's Fortify increased by about 50%. I don't see this changing a whole lot. Iron Maiden base damage increased from 10 to 20%. That's a 100% buff to Iron Maiden. And we got about a 40% buff to Horrid Iron Maiden damage. So Thorns Necros, you know, we sometimes see Iron Maiden used. It's not super popular as a curse for Necros, but that's a pretty sizable buff. Maybe Thorns Necro will rise here. Corpse Tendrils more likely to spawn a Blood Orb now. Corpse Tendrils are already a very meta skill. So many builds use it. Bone Spikes, damage increase. Again, this is the dismount skill. And minions will now... Oh! We can target with our minions. Raise Skeleton and Golem. Minions will now always engage targets with a cast curse. This is huge. Although, oh, okay. Curses target an area. How do you single out a specific target? This is almost perfect. One of the issues with minions is they're on dummy mode, they attack whoever they want. This was a deliberate design choice by the devs. Personally, I would rather have the ability to direct my minions to a specific target. I think that would really help with... So minion builds in general, they perform well enough during the campaign. You can get them to be viable, you know, well until like level 80 or something, but they're just not competitive. At the high levels, they're just not competitive with the other Necro builds, with other builds in the game. Part of the issue is minions on dummy mode versus minions that you could engage and specifically, you know, focus down targets. So being able to work more curses into your build and direct enemies with that curse, man, there's something really good here. At the very least, we have seen now the devs budge from no, you can't direct your minions to now you can. Could this be the start of moving even more in that direction? I wonder how this actually plays out. I mean, all we need to do, right, is have a three-tier system of if no enemies are cursed, minions attack whoever they want. If enemies are cursed, minions will preferentially attack that enemy. And then if you cast a curse while your cursor, right, it's called a cursor for a reason, is over a specific enemy, the minions target that specific enemy. We just got to get the devs to add that's the next thing, all right? Next patch, next season, we got to get them to add that. And then this is perfect. And then they're buffing Kalan's Edict passive. This is the Minion Necromancer passive. 50% buff here. If you've not taken damage for 2 seconds, your minions get a buff. They're trying to make Minion Necros more viable. Overall, I don't like this whole a buff if you're not taking damage kind of thing. At high levels of play, it's just very difficult to not be taking damage. Rothma's Vigor, nice buff here for Blood Necros, which underperform as well. Again, though, it's a buff based on effectively not taking damage for an extended period of time, or not being low on health for an extended period of time, but you're getting like 1 overpower every, 12 seconds. Again, as we explained, overpower just falls off in the late game. I don't see this changing anything. Now, spiked armor, thorns increased. We're getting about a 30% buff to effectiveness here. So that combined with the Iron Maiden buff, I would love to see a Thorns Necro rise here. Now, Bursting Bone, this is whenever your Bone Prison either expires or is destroyed, it makes an explosion. This is doubling the damage of that explosion. Okay, now the Bone Prison buffs make more sense in context. I wonder if something could be done here. We do see Bone Prison used sometimes. This could help make it more popular. Flesh rending. This makes it such that when Decompose spawns a corpse, you generate essence. This is doubling the effectiveness, so every time you spawn a corpse with Decompose, you're now going to gain 40 essence. Now with Decompose, you can form a corpse every 2.5 seconds. That works out to 16 essence per second on top of the 7 that we already have. That's what Decompose gives naturally, so that's 23 essence per second. I wonder if this is going to actually make us see Decompose become a more popular generator. Then fast blood. This is an aspect that makes it such that when you pick up a blood orb, you reduce the cooldown on your ultimate. We're getting a 50% buff there. Bone Storm is already a really popular skill to work into Necromancer builds. It does have a 60-second cooldown though. I'm wondering if you can actually get a perma uptime. Some kind of blood orb build that'll give you perma uptime on Bone Storm. If anyone has any idea the rate at which you can be generating blood orbs, I'm not too familiar with that, but if you can get perma Bone Storm, that'd be really cool. All right, onto the Rogue. We're seeing some tiny damage buffs to the generators. Heartseeker actually gets some significant buff. The primary Heartseeker rune is actually getting more than double its damage. That's very significant. So basically it creates ricochets, and those ricochets were only dealing 30% damage. Now they're dealing 75. Heartseeker just wasn't being used even by ranged rogues. Maybe now, maybe. Barrage is getting a 10% damage buff. Caltrops, definitely underused in the meta, but not a huge buff to the chill effect. Small cooldown reduction on Smoke Grenade. This skill is pretty much absent from the meta. I don't see this changing things. Rain of Arrows, cooldown slightly reduced. Rain of Arrows is one of the most cool skills in the game, but it just doesn't perform well enough. That 5 seconds knocked off isn't enough. It's got to be at least 45-second cooldown. Imbuement potency increased by, they're doubling that bonus there, but again, I don't see this being enough to make Rain of Arrows viable. Dismount power buffed. Close quarters combat getting a 50% buff to its damage. Oh, okay. It's actually the bonus to using the synergy effect. Alright, so close quarters combat. If you hit enemies with a marksman skill, you gain a 10% attack speed buff. If you hit them with a cutthroat skill, you gain a 10% attack speed buff. So if you do both, that's 20% attack speed. And if you're benefiting from both, then you gain a damage buff against crowd control enemies. Though I do believe this has fallen out of favor in the meta, so this is gonna further encourage people to take this and encourage you to have that dual gameplay style with, you're probably going to still have one core skill that's either melee or ranged, but then a generator or a basic skill that'll be the opposite. We were also seeing, for instance, in Twisting Blades builds, we would take this before moving on to the final form. Eventually, Twisting Blades can drop having a generator altogether, or rather a basic skill altogether, because they're able to generate enough resource to sustain attacking while dropping their basic skill. This maybe gives some extra incentive to work that basic skill, which would be Puncture, a marksman skill, back into the build. We're getting a huge cooldown reduction buff to Escape Artist, from 100 seconds to 45 seconds. Escape Artist makes it such that you drop a bunch of smoke bombs if you take damage, and then you're able to dodge the next, like, 7 attacks. Maybe this could be used for hardcore builds. It's just 45 seconds still is such a long time. It's going to trigger when you don't want it to, right? When you're not in danger, it's going to trigger. 45 seconds are going to be going by before it can trigger again. In the meantime, you're going to get hard CC'd and killed, and it's going to be on your cooldown. We're getting a 20% buff to Umbrus. This gives you a chance to spawn a Dark Shroud. Not enough to make this viable. Dark Shroud is a great skill, but it's lucky hit, so you have a chance to gain a Dark Shroud. You lose those Dark Shrouds so fast. There's so many better aspects. I don't see this making a change here. Alright, the Eyes in the Dark aspect is... I mean, in short, I don't see this changing anything, but Death Trap will keep rearming itself if it doesn't, one, hit a player, doesn't hit a boss, which is kind of the big thing, or doesn't kill an enemy. So it's going to keep rearming itself, which is nice, but it extends the cooldown on Death Trap by now 20% instead of 30%. Again, even if you're running a Death Trap rogue, there are just so many better options. I don't see this making a change. Alright, lastly onto the Sorcerer. Again, we're seeing buffs to the basic skills across the board. Nothing super game-changing, but again, it's going to help. Incinerate, getting a 10% buff to its base damage, about a 60% buff to Enhanced Incinerate, and Greater Incinerate's Immobilize will now trigger every 3 seconds instead of every 4 seconds. Incinerate is just not meta. This definitely helps it out, but I don't expect to see a big change here because it is a sit and channel skill, so we really need big buffs there to make a skill that kills all your mobility and makes you a sitting duck for enemies to kill you. We really need to see big buffs there to make those viable. Fireball gets a mana cost reduction, only about a 10% though. Again, not enough to change the meta. Frozen Orb getting some small buffs, bit more damage, bit more chance to make enemies vulnerable. This is actually an opportunity. Take that number, turn it to like 50%. Right now, Sorcs rely on Frost Nova to make enemies vulnerable. It's pretty much their only reliable tool to do so. If you can make Frozen Orb another means of getting that vulnerable, Frozen Orb builds could rise. We're seeing a buff to Blizzard. Blizzard is actually in a pretty good spot already. The issue with Blizzard builds is that Blizzard doesn't scale off of your weapon damage. It's a build that requires the glacial aspect, and that glacial aspect rolls with a set damage, and so as you level up you need to find better and better versions of it. So overall the Blizzard build at early game is just terrible. At endgame becomes very strong, very competitive. Slight buff there helps it perform a little better. This build is relatively new to the meta anyway, and we're basically now seeing it rise as a very competitive build for Sorcerers. Ice Blades has a better chance to apply Vulnerable now. This helps. Again, we highlighted the Sorcerer's Vulnerable issue here. Still probably not reliable enough. Doesn't hit enough enemies. Too long of a cooldown. Summon Lightning Spear is getting a 60% damage buff. This is pretty significant, and I think might help make Crackling Energy builds more viable. I played a Lightning Sorc back in the December press beta, and I feel like back then, maybe I'm remembering wrong, I feel like back then the Lightning Spear Crackling Energy Sorc was, well, I mean, I only had the early game to play, but it was a really fun build. Spawn a bunch of Crackling Energy, pick it up, shooting out Lightning Spears all over. Was really fun. Hopefully this can make this a more viable playstyle, because it was really fun. Speaking of Crackling Energy, we're getting about a 40% buff to its base damage, which isn't significant to begin with. The Dismount Power getting a nice buff. The Abundant Energy aspect. This gives Crackling Energy a chance to chain to an additional enemy. We're getting about a 30% buff on that chance there. Again, I'm hoping some Crackling Energy build can come together. Singed Extremities. This makes it that after you've immobilized enemies, they'll be slowed by an amount. Going from 35% to 60%, I don't see this changing much. I think as a general rule, we care whether enemies are slowed or not slowed, more so than how slowed they are. This does, however, give Sorcs more CC options. They're already very crowd control heavy characters, but it's hard to argue sacrificing another aspect just for a more potent slow. Now, Incendiary, this gives burning damage a chance to restore mana on lucky hit. Sorry, mana. Again, lucky hit, chance of a chance. That chance is very low, but we are getting a 70% buff here. Probably not enough to change things, but it feels like they're trying to chain this with that buff to Incinerate. So you can sit, channel, Incinerate, you're hitting multiple enemies, you are regaining energy to keep your Incinerate propagating. I don't think it's going to work out. Nice buff to Snow Guards here. This is actually very interesting. So while you are within your own Blizzard, you're going to take less damage. That's going from 15% to 25% damage reduction. That's quite significant. Sorcs are glass cannons. If they don't have their shield up, if they're not CCing enemies, they are getting one shot at high levels of play. This 25%, that is significant damage reduction. Snow Guards isn't currently meta for Blizzard builds, but I wonder if this could be worked in now as a defensive aspect. Now, Concentration, if you haven't taken damage in a few seconds, your mana regen rate increases. We're getting a 50% buff here. This, you know, Sorcs do have good tools to avoid taking damage, right? Currently, either you're alive and not taking damage, or you are dead. So again, between their shields and their CC, they actually do go appreciable amounts of time without taking damage. As well as barrier, right? They can generate a lot of barriers. And I believe as long as it's your barrier taking damage and you're not losing life, you should still be under the effects of this. So, you know, this is the equivalent of Warmth, I guess you can say, from D2, the Concentration, giving you that greater mana regen. Sorcs do suffer from mana gen issues, particularly at higher levels of play where they're really draining that mana. So this could help sustain. I don't know if this is, again, quite good enough to replace another critical aspect, but let's get in there. All right, then the Flame Scar unique is while you're channeling Incinerate, you shoot off sparks that hit enemies. We're getting a 50% damage buff here. They're really trying to make Incinerate a thing. Maybe between these three different buffs, maybe someone will make something happen. Now, the Staff of Lam Essen, aka the Staff of Liam Neeson, this makes your charged bolts pierce but deal less damage. now their less damage will be less and less. I don't see this as being enough to make charged bolts a meta thing. Alright, I am on my lower level Druid, and it seems all those caches that I was storing that were previously requires level 80, I can now grab them. Let's see what happens when I open one. I got them on my rogue, so let's see what happens. Am I gonna get rogue drops? Well, guess we can't really tell. No, actually, we got these ballistic primal sabatons. These are Druid only, so it's not keyed to who gets the cache, it's keyed to who opens the cache. Quickly check Purveyor of Curiosities. Everything is now displayed as normal. No more sacred, no more ancestral. And now the last thing here, let's see what happens when we open a Nightmare Sigil. What? Okay. Let's try this one, Ancient's Lament. What happens? So I've activated it. Select the Nightmare Dungeon map icon to teleport to its entrance. So, I am here. I haven't even discovered this place yet. I have nothing near it. I click it, and I am teleporting straight to it. Look at that. So it doesn't generate a waypoint. I know there was some speculation as to how exactly this would work. It's not generating a waypoint. It literally just takes me straight to the entrance. Now what happens if I am not in a town? Let's say I'm right here. Let's consume another one. Crusaders Cathedral. It's going to reset Ancient's Lament. That's fine. Doesn't matter where in the world I am. Bam. Now I got that, and I can port straight there. Look at that. So, the biggest changes here are the buffs to Nightmare Dungeons. There's a number of balance changes. I don't see the meta being shaken up too much by this, but this right here, the changes to the XP, I think this is going to shake up the meta in how people are leveling. I think this is going to make Whispers more valuable for the 1 to 50. I'm hoping that that's going to become the new best way to level 1 to 50 without having to just regrind the same half dungeon over and over and over until Blizzard nerfs it. And that now for endgame XP grind, Nightmare Dungeons are going to be that much more valuable. Cutting out the travel time to the dungeon, instantaneous travel, now makes so many more dungeons so much more viable. A big complaint there was, well, it's taking me, 30 seconds or however long to get to the dungeon. That cuts into my efficiency. Being able to run the same dungeon over and over and over, you save up a bunch of keys for one dungeon so that you can just run that one dungeon. Saves you so much time. This should see some significant meta tactic shakeup. But I turn the question to you folks, what do you think of this patch, these changes? Are you for or against the supreme quality of life of instant Nightmare Dungeon teleport, but, immersion breaking / loss of purpose to the open world? You can argue though that the buffs to Helltide and to Whispers, that's not going to obsolete the whole open world. We're still going to want to go there for those things. Again, though, sound off in the comments with your thoughts, folks. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rikers Raiders for more Diablo content.